You want to put it back, and then you need to be garuf katum. You have to sweep out the coals. So the Gemara says, we'll start from the top. Le'olam eimelacha. Really, I'll tell you, la hazir tenan. That when the Mishnah says lo yitena le'atavshil, don't put a pot on top, it means don't put it back. You had it there Friday, you left it there Friday night. It stayed nice and warm. You took it off to serve Friday night. You served everybody. Now you want to put it back. Le'achzir tenan. V'chisure mechzera. The Mishnah is missing. V'achi katani. Kira shehisiku bekashu begvava. If you have a kira, if you have a oven, shehisiku that you fired it up bekashu begvava with straw, mahazirin alei tavshil. You're allowed to put the tavshil back on Shabbat. If you took it off, you could put it back. Why? Because since the straw doesn't leave coals, there's nothing to stir, no problem. If you left it on with if you fired it up with sesame paste or with wood, which both leave residue, they leave coals, and you could stir it. Lo yahzir. You can't put the food back. Achi yigrof, unless you sweep out the coals, or achi tenet ha'efed, until you cover it with ashes. And now it lowers the flame. You're not going to come to stir the coals. Aval l'shahot. That's talking about putting it back on Shabbat after you took it off. Aval l'shahot. But if you want to leave it there Friday afternoon, going into Shabbat, afal pi she'enu garuf katum, you're allowed to leave it there even if it wasn't swept out. Why? Once the food is cooked, kema'achal ben derusai, it's cooked a third. He's calm. If it doesn't cook so well, it's okay. Umahin mashin. What are you allowed to leave on the fire? This is the extra. Mahin mashin. What are you allowed to leave on the fire? Bet Shammai omrim hamin avalot tavshil. Bet Shammai says you can leave hot water, but you can't leave food cooking. Why? I mean, clearly Bet Shammai is not the Tan of the Reisha. Bet Shammai says you can leave hot water because it's mitztamek veratlo, because it gets worse. As it cooks more, you got less hot water. So if you stir the coals to make it hot, you'll have less water. It's worse for you. You want to have more water, not less. Bet Hillel, omrim Bet Hillel says chamin v'tavshil. You can leave hot water and you can leave food, even though the food, a lot of times, like cholent or hamin, the more you cook it, the better it tastes tomorrow. Maybe it's heavier on the stomach, but it tastes good, right? Bet Hillel omrim hamin v'tavshil. Now we go, that was the end of the first part of the Mishnah. We said hazara, meaning that you're allowed to put the food back as long as it's garuf v'katum. V'hach hazara da'amri l'cha. And in the beginning, when I told you you're allowed to put the food back, lav devra kolhu. That's not everybody's opinion. Ela mahloke bet Shammai u bet Hillel. It's a mahloke between bet Shammai and bet Hillel. Shebet Shammai omrim, bet Shammai says, notlim velo mahazirim. You could take it and you can't put it back. Ubet Hillel omrim, bet Hillel says, af mahazirim. You're also allowed to put it back. Tashema. 1 second, Albert. Oh, where's Albert? Tashema. That's okay. Tashema. The Amar Rabbi Helbo. Amar Rabbi Hama Barguria. Amar Rav. Well, bring. Meaning, in the beginning, I said mahazirin alei tavshil. But now when the Mishnah says notlim avalo mahazirim ubet hillel umrim av mahazirim. What do you mean? The Reish of the Mishnah said mahazirin. So it means we're qualifying the Reisha. The Reisha is only Bet Hillel, not Bet Shammai. Ha-Chazara that we spoke about in the beginning is only Bet Hillel.
But what was the time that we said that Bet Shammai said you have to kish everything before?
What do you mean?
Before Shabbat started, didn't we have cases?
No, yeah, but not pots. The Gemara, when we were talking in first Perek about Shevitat Kelim, right? So we said Bet Shammai holds of Shevitat Kelim. They're not allowed to leave the dye cooking because you're going to have what's it called, right? But you're not allowed to do that because you're going to have because your kelim are going to work. So Gemara says, so how do you leave chamin? Gemara says, no, you mafkir the pots, right? Tashema. So again, the question is, what's our Mishnah talking about? Is our Mishnah talking about shehiyah, about leaving the food Friday night? And even though the food is ma'achal ben derusai, you still have to be mahmir and sweep out the coals? Or is it talking about hazara, but meaning to put the food back on the fire on Shabbat needs garuf katum? But to leave it Friday afternoon, mutar, as long as ma'achab and derusai. Tashima, the Amar Rabbi Helbo, or Halabo, Amar of Hama Barguria, Amar Rav. Lo Shanu, this is what it said in the Mishnah, that you could put a pot on the fire. Ela al Gaba is talking on top of the kira. Aval letocha, you want to put it inside. Asur, you're not allowed. Sort of, but it's not really that case. Where's that picture book, Mishnayot? You have a Pirush Hai? Either one. So, meaning, if we saw the picture of the what's it called? If we saw the picture of the kira, so the kira you light a fire in the oven, and then there's some holes on the top, right? And you could put the pot, you could put something like a grate, and then put the pot sitting on the top, or you could, if you take off the grate, you could stick it in. Now it's not necessarily on the coals, or maybe it is on the coals, but it's inside the oven or on top of the oven. So when it says the coals are always in the kira, pretty much. So the Gemara says, "Noatnim." If you look at the Mishnah, kira is the video on?
Yeah.
It's on. It's working. We have a chip. Yeah. Okay, good. So we say, Mishnah says, "Notnim aleha tavshil." You could put a food on it, right? So Rabbi Halabo is saying, don't think when it says aleha lav davka. No, aleha davka. Forget it, Jimmy. Right? Aleha is davka. Only you're allowed to put it on it, but you want to put it inside, not allowed. So let's see. Tashema, the Amar Rabbi Halabo, Amar of Hama Barguri, Amar of Lo Shanu, that you're allowed to put the food ela al gaba, only on top of it. Aval letocha, you want to put the food inside the kira, asur. I amarta bishlamala hazir tenan. If you think the Mishnah is talking about putting it back, hainu deshani ben tocha le'al gaba. That's the difference between putting it inside and putting it on top. So now there's two ways to understand it. Rashi has a complicated way of learning it. Rashi says, but shehiya mashin, even though enu garuf katum. So now I understand why on Friday afternoon when you're putting it in, you're not allowed to put it in, because there's going to be actual coals there, and you're going to be putting it directly on the coals, and that's considered hatmana b'davar mosif haval. And this is probably Rashi, because Rashi also, anyway, the whole Perek is talking about hatmana. Here's the picture of the kira, right? Let's look at it again. Here's the kira, right? So you see there's the fire inside, and there's these two holes. This pot, this is like the fat pot, the fat boy pot, so it sits on the top. But if you wanted, in theory, if you had the right shaped pot, you could actually lower it in, and it will sit on the coals. Either you put it down from here, or you stick it in the oven from there. Either way, he says you could put it. You could put it on top, or you could put it inside. So he says, no, you're only allowed to put it on top, but putting it inside is asur. So Rashi says, if the Mishnah is talking about hazara, right? Meaning, when did we say you have to sweep out the coals? Is talking about when you're put it back on Shabbat. But to leave it there before Shabbat, you're allowed to leave it there even though you didn't sweep out the coals, right? So we could say, notnim aleha tavshil before Shabbat when the coals are there. But to put it inside before Shabbat when the coals are there, on the coals, that's asur. Why? Because you're not allowed to put it directly on the coals. Coals are mosif haval. Didn't we say in the end of the last perek that hatmana b'davar mosif haval is asur? No, but dvar mosif haval gezerah shemi chate begahalim.
What happens to Shema for on top? Why you let to leave it on top?
No, it's not. That's not hatmana. It's not touching the coals. It's only hatmana if it's touching.
You might move the coals if you put it on top.
We don't have to make a gezerah. It's ma'achal ben derusai, whatever. But on the coals, that's a blanket gezerah. Gezerah shemi chate begahalim.
Why aren't they afraid that you're going to stir the coal even if it's on the bottom, on the top?
So why you're saying, you're asking a different question. Why? And it's actually what you're asking is actually machloket aposkim. But we hold that hatmana is asur b'davar mosif aval, even if it's in the pashel machab and the pashel kol tzorko. Why? Because when you put it on the top and you didn't make hatmana, you're just worried about it cooking, but you're not worrying about it stay hot longer. When you put it on the coals, you're showing I want it to stay hot longer. So it's not enough. If it's ma'achab and drusai, it will cook. It'll be okay. You want it to stay hot? It has to be in. And even then, it might stay hot, it might not stay hot. So once you make atmana, because you show that you want it to stay hot long term, so now you might come to stir the coals anyway. So that's the way Rashi learns. Rashi learns, if you tell me it's talking about lahzir, and the shehiyah is talking about enu garuf katum, so then I understand why you can't put it inside the oven, because you're going to be putting it directly on the coals. And putting it directly on the coals, atmana b'dvar mosif aval. Tosfot learns differently. Tosfot learns that it's talking, says if you're talking about lahzir tanan, so I understand why you could put it on top and not inside, because on top is not mechzikim vashel, and inside is mechzikim vashel. And on Shabbat, I have to make sure that it doesn't look like bishul. But if you're talking about l'shahot tanan, and when is the concept of shehiyah? Before Shabbat. Before Shabbat, what's the difference where I put it? There's no mechzikim vashel before Shabbat. There's no problem if it looks like I'm cooking by putting it inside.
When you put it inside,
when I put it there is the problem. If it was there from before Shabbat, there's no problem. Not the same. Not the same.
People cook that way.
Yeah, okay. It's a question. It's a question. That's a question. Okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara, Tashema, we repeat. Tashema, the Amar bi Halabu, Amar Abhama, Bagruri, Amarav. Lo Shanu, the Mishnah that you're allowed to put it on the thing, Ela al Gaba, on top. Aval letocha, you want to put it inside Asur. I Amarta Bishlama, if you tell me Lachzir, Taran, it's talking about returning the food to the fire on Shabbat. Hainu Deshani, that's the difference, Ben Tochal al Gaba. Rashi according to Rashi, Tosfot according to Tosfot. Ela I Amarta, but if you said, L'shahot tanan, the Mishnah is talking about leaving it there before Shabbat, then it has to be garuf katum. Mali tocha, mali al gaba. What's the difference? You put it on top. What's the difference? You put it inside. Again, according to Rashi, because it's garuf katum, there's no hatmana b'davar mosif haval. You're not insulating it with coals. And according to Tosfot, because if I'm doing it before Shabbat, there's no difference if it's on top or inside. There's no mechzikim vashel before Shabbat. It's not Shabbat yet. Thank you, Bobby. Excellent. Mali al gaba. Says Gemara, Mi Savat, you think Rabbi Halabo Arei Shakai? You think Rabbi Halabo is talking about when it says Notnim Alei Tavshil? No, Aseifa Kai. He's going on the Seifa. Ubet Lil Omrim Af Mahazirim. You also allowed to put it back, right? Amar Rabbi Halbo, Amar Rabbi Hama Barguria, Amarav Lo Shanu El Al Gaba. This is what Bet Hillel allows you to put the food back on the oven is only Al Gaba. Aval Tocha. You want to put it back in the oven, it's asur. Rashi says, nothing. What? Doesn't, no, Chazara is always garuf v'katum, and even so you're not allowed to put it back. Why? Clearly because of Mexican Vashel, there's no atman abdavar mosif aval because it's garuf v'katum. So that's what in Tosfot's point of Rashi is, why do you bother yourself to say what you said? In the end, you're going to have to admit that there's a sevara of Mexican Vashel, because it's talking about Hazara b'garuf v'katum, and you tell me Tocha is Asur. The Chaura from this point, that Tocha is Asur, to be Mahzir, even in a garuf v'katum, so you're never allowed to put it back in an oven.
Isn't that the halakha?
What?
You're allowed to put something in there.
Right, because of this.
Only on the top.
Only on the top.
You can't say it might be cold left over, it might be...
I was goref tzarich shegrov kol tzorko. There's no atmana, that's for sure. Whatever it is, our oven is hotter and worse. Tashema, I'll bring you another proof. So now we're going back. Now we're going back to the concept of. We're going back to the question: is the Mishnah talking about shehiyah or hazara? So now we have a braita, very interesting braita. This braita is interesting in a different way because you see how the Mishnah is one of there were two versions of the mahloket, and now Mishnah is one of them. Or not even one. Tashema, bet kirot hamat imot. You have we have double ovens. They have a double kira. Right? Look in Rashi. Hamatimot mehubarot yahad. They're connected together. V'kir shel heres mafsiket benehem. It's this picture doubled.
What do they share? Where is the heat source?
Had 2 holes, huh?
Has 4 holes. This one looks like your oven, your four burners at home. That's what it looks like on top.
But what about the bottom?
What?
Separated by walls.
The bottom. No. So the bottom on the bottom
How many
here.
sources of fire?
So you have this one, and on the other side you have another one in the back with an opening on the other side. Right. So there's 2. You have 2, and there's a wall in between. They're back to back.
Also, there's not the same heat source.
It's not the same heat source, but they do share heat.
Because they're
Right.
touching the walls.
Right. They're connected. They have in the back too. Heck,
You put the foot here with the
like this.
I have to.
Like this.
Right.
Here's
So this
one
one you're putting
entrance,
coal from
there's
here.
one entrance,
There's
and
2
then
and 2. That's all. That's the case. Just listen to the case. Bet kirot hamatimot. I have 2 kirot that are. It's a twin kira set. Ahad girufav. It's the super deluxe. You went into the store. Give me the super deluxe. Ready? Ahad girufa uktuma. One of them is swept out and you did or katum. The ahad she'ena girufa uktuma. The other one is not. Right? So here we have it. This one is garufa katum and this one is not. Mashin. Notice we're talking about shehiyah. Shehiyah means leave it there from Friday, right? Mashin al gabe girufa uktuma. Ve'en mashin al she'ena girufa uktuma. Umahin, why? Because we are not like Hananya, like the Chachamim. On top, could be inside too. Umahin machine, and what are you allowed to leave? Bet Shammai omrim velo klum. What does that mean? Meaning I wasn't talking according to Bet Shammai. Bet Shammai argues. Ubet Hillel omrim. Now that's not like our Mishnah, because in our Mishnah, Bet Shammai said you're allowed to leave chamin.
Water, but no food.
Right? Bet Shammai omrim velo klum. Chamin avalot tavshil. So Bet Hillel is Bet Shammai by us, right? Akar, if you took it off, divrei akol lo yahzir. Divrei, that's Bet Shammai. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's the way Rabbi Meir heard it. Rabbi Meir heard the mahloket differently. That Bet Hillel is like Bet Shammai, and Bet Shammai is even more mahmir. He upped the whole thing a notch. Oh, Rabbi Meir doesn't worry about the Mishnah. He's a Tanakh. Right?
Why does Ben Hillel change his Sevarado?
It's not Bet Hillel changing. There's 2. They heard 2 versions of the mahloket.
How is received?
Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Bet Shammai Omrim Hamin Avalot Avshil. Bet Hillel says, Rabbi Yehuda says that Bet Shammai says Hamin Avalot Avshil, like our Mishnah. Bet Hillel Omrim Hamin V'Tavshil, hot water and food. Bet Shammai Omrim, Bet Shammai says, Notlim, you can take it off. Avalom Hazirim, but you can't put it back. Ubet Hillel Omrim, Af Mahazirim. Right? So now, basically we have Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir is not like our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda seems to be like our Mishnah. If he's exactly our Mishnah, except he happens to have added that there's a paired kira on the other side that wasn't garuf for katum. Right? And Rabbi Yehuda is good if you assume that our Mishnah is talking about Shehiyah on Friday afternoon. Right? So we say, now it's interesting, but the Gemara never imagined that the reason why Rabbi Meir is changing the stats is because there's another one back over here. That's not an issue. Meaning it's clear to the Gemara that the fact that this oven is full of coals and they're burning and heat is coming to here, right? That's not affecting the halakha. The reason why the Braita said such a case is to teach you that I don't care about this. Mashin al gabe girufa, ve'en mashin al she'ena girufa. This one doesn't affect that one. That's the first hidush. Now this one is the same as always. It might have been possible to think that because of this, everybody upped the ante a little bit. Because this one is also getting, so that Rabbi Meir holds Bet Shammai is everybody's mahmir, and Rabbi Yehuda holds it not mahmir. The Gemara doesn't entertain such a sevara. Watch what the Gemara says. Let's see. Okay, the Gemara assumes that that's not true. Whose problem?
There's nothing there. What's the problem? There's nobody dying. There's no. Empty.
Yeah, he could go to the other oven to make it hot, make it other one.
What? No, so now you're saying that the other oven is affecting. We say the other oven doesn't affect.
You have to assume that there's residual heat coming.
I didn't, Bobby. I didn't say there's no heat. I know there's heat. We don't care.
Why tell me there's another?
But he's right. You could go in
To
there.
teach you that this one doesn't affect this one. To prevent mahmirim like you characters from ruining the whole story. Just because, imagine that this is Bobby's and this is yours, and you guys sort of back to, you bought the joint one and you split it, partnership. So now Bobby's lazy, he fell asleep Friday afternoon, you got to pull your food off.
Why do you want to go do the whole dish and put it there?
So let's see. So the Gemara says, if you say our Mishnah is also talking about Shehiyah, Matnitin, Mani Rabbi Yudai. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Yudah, even though Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Over here, the Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Yudah. No, it's not the end of the world, and it's not Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Meir. Ela Iyamar Lachzir Tanan, if you say the Mishnah is talking about Hazara, Matnitin Mani. I have two big Tanaim opinions, and our Mishnah is like nobody. Rabbi Meir. Ma'lom Rabbi Meir, v'lo Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Rabbi Meir, if it's Rabbi Meir, kasha lebet Shammai behada, ulebet Hillel betarti. If it's going to be according to Bet Shammai, it's kasha behada, because Bet Shammai holds an Al Mishnah machine, and Bet Hillel holds, and according to Rabbi Meir, he holds in machine. And if it's according to Bet Hillel, it's kasha and tarti. It's a question on what you're allowed to be masheh. Al Mishnah says chamin and tafshil, and the Rabbi Meir says only chamin. And in Mahazirim, Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel holds, and Mahazirim according to Rabbi Yehuda. So two questions. And Rabbi Yehuda, and even if it's Rabbi Yehuda, Kashya Girufa Uktuma, because over here in the Braita, Rabbi Yehuda requires Girufa Uktuma for Shehiyah, and Al Mishnah, he doesn't. Le'olam Emelech Lachzir. I'll tell you that our Mishnah is talking about Hazara, and it goes like Hananya, and you're allowed to be Masheh even on the Enu Garuf Katum. So who does our Tana hold like? V'Tana Didan Savala Rabbi Yehuda behada. He holds in one point. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Upalig ale behada, and he argues on him in one point. Savala Rabbi Yehuda behada behamim v'tavshil v'notin u'mahazirim. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda about which version of Hamin and Tafshil, that they're both mutar according to Bet Hillel and not in Mahazirim according to Bet Hillel. Upalig ale behada, but he argues on him. The ilu Tana didan our Tana savar leshahot like Hananya. Aval pi she'enu garuf v'katun. V'Rabbi Yehuda savar, and Rabbi Yehuda holds b'leshahot nami garuf v'katun in ilolo. It's a very difficult answer to Gemara. We're sort of splitting Tanaim. Our Tana holds like Rabbi Yehuda for half, and he doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda for half. That's a big dohak. Why is our Gemara willing to entertain such a big dohak? In order, I have a Tana that fits perfectly if you assume the Mishnah is lishahot. Tosafot on the top by the Chsur Emech says, Le'olam e'melecha mishum dekaimalan kahananya kemo she'afaresh be'ezrat Hashem dahik le'ukme matnitin kahananya. Tosafot says the reason why the Gemara is bending over backwards to get the Mishnah to fit like Hananya is because we hold like Hananya. Because we hold like Hananya, we really want the Mishnah to. So we're willing to take a convoluted thing to get it to fit like Hananya. It's just better for us. But it's not. That's why we're pushing so hard. Now, the truth is, at this point, the Gemara stops discussing how to fit the Mishnah. The questions we had on the Mishnah were okay. Now we go on to a new topic. Ibaya lehu, and then we're going to come back. Ibaya lehu, they asked the question. We said in our Mishnah you're allowed to put it on top, and not inside. And maybe on Erev Shabbat you're allowed to put it inside and on top, right? Ma'ul ismoch. I want to put the food not on top of the oven, not in the oven, next to it. Right? I have the oven. There's a little space between the oven and the wall. I'll put the pot there. I'm sure it'll get nice and warm. Yeah, right in there. You want to stick it in there. Now we're talking about, can I be masheh? Can I be somech on an enu garuf?
So this is a burning.
This is a really hot oven. I'm not putting it on top. I'm putting it next to it.
What are you doing? You're doing nothing.
It's getting hot.
So what?
And maybe I'll stir the coals. Maybe I'll stir the coals.
Not there. Maybe.
What?
Maybe.
We didn't have a problem, but now we have.
Ah, very good. That's the proof the Gemara is going to bring. Tashema shte kirot matimot, by the double oven. Ahad kirufa uktuma v'ahad she'ena kirufa uktuma. One is swept out, one is not. Mashin al gabe kirufa uktuma. You can leave it on the swept out one. Ve'af al gav de kasalik le havla mi'idach. Even though heat is going up from the other one. Dilma shani hata. Maybe that case is different. Tikivan de midliya shalit ba'avira. Since it's up high, so it's not getting so much heat from here. This heat, it's too indirect, and there's a lot of circulating air to get rid of it.
They didn't know heat rises?
What?
Heat rises.
It's not at the top.
Right, heat rises, it's going up, but it's not going so much this way. Right? So therefore, between the convection in the room, you're not going to get that much heat. Right? Dilma kiven de midli yesha be'avira. Tashema, the Amar of Safra, Amar bichia, kitma v'nitlabta. Kitma, you spread the ashes on top, v'nitlabta, but it didn't listen. It bounced back. Right? You covered it with ashes.
Didn't work.
The fire went down. All of a sudden, poof, it burnt through. Kitma v'nitlabta. So now the first question is, if I spread ashes and it came back, what status does that have? Is it ketuma because I tried to? Or is it not ketuma?
Well, you had the intention to.
Does that help or not? Is our intentions good? Tell that to the guys that wanted the goods. I wanted to ship you. I tried. Right? Kitma v'nitlabta. So the Gemara says, if you put the ashes and it came back, Som chinla, you're allowed to leave the food next to it. Umekaimin alea, you're allowed to leave food on top of it. V'notli mimena, you can take the food off of it. Umahazirim lam, you're allowed to put it back on. So it's considered ketuma. If I let you put it back, it means it's considered ketuma. Even though the fire came back, it's enough that I spread it. I made a heker. Right?
It's burning back regular.
It's okay.
The heker is gone.
The heker is there. The fact that I did it is enough. Shma mina, you see from there, lismoch nami, even when you want to put it next to it, kitema'in, if you sprinkled it, yes. Lo kitma lo, if you didn't sprinkle the ashes, you're not allowed. Smoch, som chinla, v'mekamim alea. Right? Why is the Braita say you're allowed to be somech if kitma? Ma'ashma, if not kitma, you're not allowed to be somech. Says Gemara, ulta'amech, if you think that everything it says in this Braita is only if kitma mutar, notli mimena de katani, when it says you're allowed to take it off, is also you only allowed to take it off if kitma? What does notli mean? Right? Kitma in lo kitma lo, ela, tana notlim mishum hazirim. Of course, notlim is not important. I wrote notlim so that you could put it back. Hachanami tana somchim, you said put it next to it, mishum mekaimin, so that in order to say that you put it on top, meaning somchim is just along the way we wrote it. But it's not really important. Says the Gemara, I don't like that answer so much. Hachi hashta, is that a comparison?
Doesn't really make sense.
Hatam notlim umahazirim bechad makomu. You can't put it back unless you take it off. So even though notlim is not important, I wrote it in order to facilitate putting it back. But tana notlim mishum hazirim elahacha somchim bechad makom. Putting it next to it is next to it. Mekaimim b'makom bechad makomu, and putting it on top is a different place. So what do you have to put next to it to tell me on top? They're not related. Right? Dohak. I mean, it's not a total disproof. It's just sounds strange. So the Gemara doesn't accept that as a disproof, and the Gemara says, "My have Allah." So what's the maskana? Are you allowed to be somech or not? Tashema kira shesikua begefetu be'etzim. If you have a oven that you lit it up with gefet and etzim, which leaves coals, som chimla, you're allowed to put it next to it. Ve'en mekaymin aleha, but you can't put food on top of it. Ela im ken gerufa uktuma, unless you swept it out. So you see, even according to the opinion that to leave it on top you need garuf katum, like the chachamim, to put it next to it is mutar. Now the Gemara starts a new point. Gehalim she'emimu. If you have coals that sort of cooled, they ashed over. They're still hot, but they ashed. Or shenatan alea ne'oret shel pishtan daka. Or you sprinkle them with the oret shel pishtan is like the garbage part of the pishtan, a thin layer. Harehi keketuma. That's already enough to be considered like ketuma. Even though it's not, you didn't put a major level and it's not totally out and it's still hot, you made a sign. If I wanted it to be hotter, I wouldn't have put it. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Oshaya, kitma v'huv'ara. If you put the dust on top and the fire went back on, mashin aleha hamin shu hamu kol tzorkan. You're allowed to leave on it water that's fully heated. V'tavshil shebishel kol tzorko, and food that's fully cooked. That sounds like Shema Mina. We see from here, mitztamek v'yafeh lo mutar. So it must be he's holding that even though you sprinkled it, since it went back on fire, it's not like garuf anymore. He's arguing on the rabbi before. And therefore he's only letting you leave hamin shu hamu kol tzorkan, hot water that's fully hot, because I don't have to stir, and food that's fully cooked, because there's nothing to stir. And therefore I learn that on even if I wouldn't have sprinkled it at all, it would also be mutar to leave fully cooked food, even though it's getting better. Right? The chicken and potatoes, it gets better, right? For a while it gets better. After a while, it gets ruined. But for a while it gets better. At that point, when it's fully cooked but getting better, am I allowed to leave it or not? He thinks yes, because it's fully cooked. After I'm not. I argue on Hananya, but only up to fully cooked. Once it's fully cooked, even though it's still getting better, it's going to be mutar.
That's good for us.
It's great for us, but it's not going to last. Shema Mina, we see from here, mitztamek v'yafelo, even though it's getting better, mutar. Says the Gemara, no. No, kol tzorko.
Has to be fully.
Shani hacha, the kitma. Over here is different, because you sprinkle the ashes on top of it. Ihachi. So one sec. If you're telling me that because I sprinkled ashes, even though it went back on fire, it's considered katum, my lememra. What's the chidush of the Mishnah? Huv'ara itzterich. No, the chidush is even though it went on fire. Mao de teima, I might have thought. Kivan de huv'ara, once it went back on fire. Hadra la lemota kamait, that's considered enokatum. Kamash malan, that once I covered it, it's good enough.
So you could do a sketch covering.
I don't know if that.
Like a very thin
maybe. Amar. So now the question is: so why does it say notin aleh hamin shu hamu kol tzorkan tavshil should be shel kol tzorko? I could even put less than that. I could put anything if it's kitma. So they say that it's coming to tell you that even like this, even by garufikat, sorry, even though it's fully cooked, only because it's garufikatu. The opposite. Now, it turns into the opposite proof.
Right.
The proof becomes even though it's fully cooked, it's only mutar because it's garufikat.
If you didn't have a garufikat for sure, even
right.
if it's fully cooked, you got to keep it.
Right. Ihachi. That's good. Amar Rabba Babachana. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Kitma v'huv'ara. You sprinkled it and it came hot. Mashin aleh hamin shu hamu kol tzorkan. You're allowed to leave food that's fully cooked. Tavshil should be shel kol tzorko. Va'afilu gehalim shel rotem. Rotem coals were much hotter. Right? Certain type of tree. Rashi. Hamin yoter mishar gehalim. Ve'ena memaharin lechabot. They don't go out so fast. Kidamrin b'mocheret tesefina. High quality coals. Shma mina, we see from there, mitztamek v'yafelo mutar. That clearly, again, they're assuming Rabbi Yochanan holds huvara doesn't mean anything, and mitztamek v'yafelo then mutar. So no, shani hacha, it's different. The kitma because he covered it. Ihachi, my remember what's the chidush? Huvara it's terichale. The chidush is even though one back on fire. Hainu hach. So it's the same thing you told me before. Gihalim shorotin mitzterichale. No, the chidush is since it's gihalim shorotin. You might say that if you made a small cover on regular coal is good enough. Gihalim shorotin. What were you thinking? Even gihalim shorotin. Amar of Sheshat, Amar of Yohanan. Kira shesikua begefet ubeetzim, which leaves coals. Mashin alea hamin shelo hamu kol tzorkan. Not fully cooked. How cooked? Ma'achal ben derusai. V'tavshil shelo bishel kol tzorko. Ma'achal ben derusai. Akar, if you took it off, lo yachzir, you can't put it back. Ad sheyigrof, ad sheyiten efer, unless you did that before Shabbat. Right? Kasavar, so what does he hold? Rabbi Yochanan is holding matnitin lachzir tenan. The Mishnah is lachazir, like Hananya. Aval l'shahot, but you want to leave it before Shabbat. Mashin, you're allowed to leave the food. Aval pi she'enu garuf ve'enu katum. So now we're starting to get the firepower behind the Shita of Hananya. We have Rav Sheshat in the name of Rabbi Yochanan paskening halacha l'ma'aseh lachazir tenan. Right? Amarava, I'm not impressed. Tarvayu Tanani, the two hidushim of Rav Sheshet and Rav Yochanan Mishnayot beferush lishahot taneina. That in order that you're allowed to leave food on the fire even if it's not fully cooked. I have a Mishnah like that. In notni metapat betoch tanur. You're not allowed to put bread in the oven im chashecha Friday afternoon. V'lo harara and not the loaf. Al gabege halim on the fire. Ela kedeshi kremu paneha, unless it's crusted. Hakarmu paneha, but if it's crusted, shari, it's mutar, even though it's not fully cooked. That's the Mishnah at the end of the first perek. Then we said that Mishnah is like Hananya. That karmu is the equivalent of ma'achal ben derusai. So I have a stam Mishnah like Hananya. I don't need Rabbi Yochanan to tell me that. And the second part, lachzir, to put back that it needs garufa katum, nami tanena. Betelel omrim af mahazirin. You're allowed to put it back. Ve'ad kan lo kasharu betelel to put it back. Ela be'gerufa uktuma. And our Mishnah, which is talking gerufa uktuma. Aval b'she'ena gerufa uktuma lo. Says Gemara Rav Sheshat. Nami diyuka dematniti kamash malad. He's just teaching you how to read the Mishnah. That the Mishnah is talking lahazir. That's all. No major chidush. You couldn't figure it out anyway. Amar of Shmuel bar Yehuda, Amar of Yochanan. Again, kira shesiku begefetu be'etzim. With wood or with sesame paste. Mashin alea. You're allowed to leave on it tafshil. Shebishel kol tzorko. Ve'hamin shuhamu kol tzorko. Ve'afilu mitztamek v'yafelo. So even if it's getting better, you're allowed to leave it there. Is that arguing? Maybe he's arguing on what we said before. And he's saying not like Hananya, but only mitztamek v'yafelo, only if it's fully cooked. Rav Shmuel Amar le'ahu merabanan le'Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, who just told them over this thing. Ha Rav Shmuel, the Amri Tava, Rav and Shmuel both say mitztamek v'yafelo asur. If it's getting better, it's asur. And the Chachamim are only matir by mitztamek v'ra'lo, when it's getting worse. So you have no incentive, like hot water. Says the Gemara, he told him, Ki ka'amina, Amar of you, Ki ka'amina. He says, when I'm telling you, Rabbi Yochanan ka'amina, I'm telling you what Rabbi Yochanan holds. You're right, Rav Shmuel holds it's asur. Amar le Rav Ukva mi Meishan le Rav Ashi. So Rav Ukva mi Meishan told Rav Ashi, Atun you, the mekarvatu le Rav Shmuel, you're closer to Rav and Shmuel's territory, and they hold mitztamek v'yafelo is asur. Avidu ke Rav Shmuel, follow Rav and Shmuel. Anan, us, na'avid ke Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to follow Rabbi Yochanan. Rashi says, look in Rashi, v'Rav Shesha nami diyuka demadnitin kamashmalan, mishum de lo matni lebehedya hakar mushari, because the Mishnah doesn't say clearly that if karmu panea is mutar, so that's what he wanted to teach you. Va'anan, says Rashi, us. Very rare that Rashi gives you a psak halacha. Va'anan and us. Temashinan kedera al gabe kira she'ena grufa. We leave our food on a non-garuf kira. Ad chananya samchinam. We're relying on chananya. Why? Ho'il v'tanan stam matnitin kavate. The Mishnah, the first perek is like chananya. Kedamar akar mushari. Va'avagav delo bishel kotzorko, even though it's not fully cooked. Ve'amar Rav Shesha mishmed Rabbi Yochanan kavate. Rav Shesha quoted Rabbi Yochanan like that. The matnitin the pirkin mishum hazarau de bai gerufa v'lashalom. The kolhani emora'ed de asri. All these rabbis that are saying it's asur. Savri matnitin l'shaotanan. They learn the Mishnah l'shaot. But we're somech on Rav Shesha tam Rabbi Yochanan, and Ravahu seems to agree with him, and we leave on the fire even as long as it's ma'achal ben derusai, even in a garuf kadun. That's Rashi's psak. Tosfot we already saw. Tosfot says the halacha is like here. Look in Tosfot. Am Rav Sheshat pasak Rabbeinu Chananel. The halacha ki Rav Sheshat am Rabbi Yochanan. Why? The Rava da Amar Tarvayu Tanani Sfira le Kavate. V'chem pasak Rashi. The stam matnitin the perekama ki Hananya. Mutar le shaot afilu be'ena grufa. Aval lahazir to put it back. Vaday asur elam ken garuf katum. Va'afilu bishel kol tzorko ke deprishi leil. So Rashi and Tosfot and Rabbeinu Hananel all hold lahazir tenan like Hananya. The Gemara continues. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. Ma'u le shahot. Do we hold she has mutar? Amar le Ha Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Yehuda, Rav's great student, Rav and Shmuel's great student of Yehuda, Mashu leve achil. They would leave it for him on the fire, not garuv katum, and he will eat it. Amar le, he said, Bar mi ned Rabbi Yehuda. Don't bring me proofs from Rabbi Yehuda, from Rav Yehuda. Why? The afilu kiven de misukanu. He was sickly. Afilu b'Shabbat nami shari lemeibadle. He was always in the state of cholesh yesh bo sakana. You let him make it for him on Shabbat. That's how weak he was. Leave elach, healthy people like me and you, mai. Amarle, he told him, Besura Mashu. In Surah, yeshiva town, they used to leave on the fire. The Harav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Mare de'uvda hava. He was very medakdek b'ma'asav, u'mashu leve achil. They would leave it when he would eat. Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, Ka'imna kamed Rav Huna. I was in front of Rav Huna. V'shahin le, maybe Rav Huna bereid Rav Yoshua. V'shahin le, Kasa de Harsena. They left Kasa de Harsena. Or Kamed Rav Kahana, it could be. V'havu mashin le Kasa de Harsena. They left some fish sauce on the fire for him. Ve'achal, and he ate it. Ve'lo yadana, but I'm not sure why. Imishum de kasavar mitztamek v'yafelo mutar. Was it because he holds that as long as it's fully cooked, mitztamek v'yafelo, even though it's mitztamek v'yafelo, it's mutar? O mishum de kiven de it bemeha. Since the kasa de harsana has flour in it, mitztamek v'ra'alohu. It's considered getting worse.
No, he doesn't know which one.
He doesn't know which one. Amar Rav Nachman. If you hold like Hananya, maybe he doesn't hold like Hananya. Amar Rav Nachman, mitztamek v'yafelo asur. If it's getting better, it's asur to leave it. Sounds like the Chachamim, right? Mitztamek v'ra'alo mutar. If it's getting worse, it's mutar. Klala de milta, general rule is, kol de'it bemecha, anything that has flour in it, mitztamek v'ra'alo, is considered getting worse. Lebar mitashil de lifta, unless it's lifit. The avagav de'it bemecha, even though it has flour, mitztamek v'yafelo. Why? Because the lifit is strong, and as you cook it, it gets sweeter. V'hani mili de'it bebisra. When is lifit good as long as it cooks? When you have meat in the pot. Why? Because the meat gives the fat, and the fat breaks the lifit. Avalet bebisra, you're not getting anywhere by cooking it longer. Mitzamek v'ra'alohu. V'chi'id bebisra, when it has meat, nami lo amaran ela de lo kabai le orhin. It's only if you don't have guests coming over. You're eating at home. When you're eating with your family, you don't care what it looks like. It just tastes good, right? Kabai le orhin, if I have guests, no, now it has to look pretty. As the meat gets cooked more and more, it falls apart. It's not pretty to serve, right? Aval kabai le orchim, if you need it for the guests, mistamek v'ra'alo. Lifda, daisa v'tamri, ma'achal she'oseh, lifda Rashi says, ma'achal she'oseh mite'enim. Daisa is, cereal or burghul. Tamre is something they make. Right. One is a dalid, one is a taf. Rashi says, lifta, ma'achal she'osim te'enim.
Lifta is the lifta. No?
Yeah. Daisa v'tamre mitztamek v'ra'alohen. They all get worse as you cook them, and they're mutar to leave even on an enu garuf v'katun. L'ma'aseh. Before we bring a Mishnah Berachah Gimel. L'ma'aseh, there's a classic line. The reef is posek like the Chachamim. That mitztamek v'ra'alo, that Ma'achal ben Durusai is asur, and mitztamek v'yafelo is asur. Yini mitztamek v'ra'alo. The Rambam is posek like that. The Rosh, the Bala Ma'or has a classic little poem over here. The Bala Ma'or says, listen to this. He says, V'yesh omrim, some say, Ki takanat rabotenu hi. It's a takana from our rabbis, La'aneg et Shabbat behamin. To enjoy the Shabbat with hamin. V'kol mi she'enu ochel hamin, tzarich b'dika aharav im humin. Right? Because who doesn't eat chamin? The karaim, right? They don't have fire in the house on Shabbat. Lo tevaru esh bechol moshavotechem. Right? Ve'emet, and if he dies, such a guy, because he's a mean, yit'asku bo amemin, let the goyim bury him. Ve'lehazmin ulevashel lehatmin. We have to cook before Shabbat. We have to invite people. We have to be matmin. Le'aneg et Shabbat, to enjoy the Shabbat. Ulhashmin, gain weight on Shabbat. Hu hama'amin. He's the guy that believes. V'zoche leketz hayamin. He'll be zochet to Mashiach. V'yesh min ha'chachamim. There are rabbis like the Rif. Omrim al hasemol shu yamin. They got the whole sugya mixed up. They tell you that the left is the right. Anu korim alehem. Mi yiten haresh da harishum v'ti lahem lechochma. Like the last line doesn't rhyme, but it's a classic balamo. Zoche u'mashmin. But mashmin. But the Rosh is unsure. The Rosh can't say for sure. He says, listen, Yisrael adukim b'mitzvat onik Shabbat, and if we tell them to be mahmir like the Chachamim, they're not going to listen. Hanach lahem liYisrael. Maran in Shulchan Aruch says like this: Kira shehi asuya kekedera. V'shoftim al pi kedera lemala. You put a pot on top. V'yesh ba makom shefitat shete kederot. There's enough room for two pots. Im husaka begefet shu psolet shel zetim. Not like Rashi. Or be'etzim or wood asuli ten alea tavshil mi be'od yom. You're not allowed to put food on it before Shabbat. Lashoto alea to leave it on the elam kenit bashil kol tzorko, fully cooked. V'hu mitztamek v'ra'alo, and it's getting worse. The that we don't have to worry, maybe you're going to stir it. Or, what we learned in the first perek, shu high, if it's raw. Shalonit bashel klal, that it wasn't cooked at all. The kivan shu high, since it's raw, masiyah da'ato mimen ala mahar. He takes his mind off of it till tomorrow. Ubekol alayla, and overnight yachol it bashel below hitu, he will cook without stirring. Aval imnit bashel ketzat, if it's somewhat cooked. Velonit bashel kol tzorko, and it's not fully cooked. V'afilu nit bashel kol tzorko, even if it's fully cooked. V'umitztamek v'yafelo, and it's getting better. Haishin, and we're afraid shemi hateh, maybe he's going to stir. V'asul hashoto aleh, you not leave it on it. Elam ken garaf, unless he swept out the coals. Da'inu sheyotzim mimenu kol hagehalim, or katam, or he put ashes on top. Da'inu shekisa gehalim be'efer lema'et chomam. V'im natan ba haticha haya, if he put a raw piece of meat in, mutar. Because one raw piece of meat, you're not going to eat the whole thing if it's with a raw piece of meat. He takes his mind off of it till the morning. What? Period. No. If it's not cooked, no. Mutar lesmoch la kedera. Smicha is mutar, even not karuf. Then he says, then Maran says, V'yesh omri is one of the longest ifim. V'yesh omri, and some say, Shekol shenit bashel kema'achal ben durusai. If it was cooked like ma'achal ben durusai, or shenit bashel kol tzorko, if it was fully cooked, u'mitztamek v'yafelo, mutar lehashoto al gabe kira. you're allowed to leave it on top of the kirah. Afilu husak begefet ube'etzim. Even if you lit it with gefet etzim, afilu eno gerufa uktuma. V'lo uzkera gerufa uktuma. When did we say ni garufa katum? Ela keshetchil et bashel. If it started cooking, v'lo gila machal ben durusai. V'chen le'inyan. Also, im natala kedera me'alef. You took it off. Ubala hazira alea b'shabbat. We still didn't finish the saif. So Maran, stam and yesh. In theory, we should paskin like the stam, which is the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam. But the poskim say, there's Eretz Chaim Sitehon, and others they say that the minhag by the Sfaradim from before the time of Maran was like Hananya, that even Eno Garuf Katum, as long as Machab and the Rusai, it's mutar. Chaim Yosef told Rabbi Moshe Cohen, he says, from Chamizra Atiyah we learned that this is one of the things that we don't like Maran. Yeah.